G'day everyone. Welcome to the season update for August. This month we've got a special guest today. It's Chelsea McDonald, and she'll be going through something that not too many of us are thinking about at the moment, and that'll be irrigation. So irrigation scheduling, irrigation uniformity, and while we're not even thinking about irrigation scheduling at the moment, these are the things that we should be thinking about now and looking to run now to make sure that when spring does come on us, and it will potentially come pretty quickly, that we'll have everything in order. So, and then we'll go on to the season update for around the state as we usually do. So I'll hand it over to Chelsea. Welcome, Chelsea, and if you want to give us a bit of a rundown of pivot uniformity. It's something we've started doing. Pivot uniformity testing has started doing as a service here at AgLogic, and last year was the first season, and we've had some pretty interesting and eye-opening results. So from that, I'm really interested to see what you've got out of last year. So take it away.
Thank you. Yeah. So irrigation uniformity testing it's not measuring anything about the pivot or the machine itself. It's just measuring how evenly the water is applied on the ground. So in Tasmania, we've got a lot of pivots. We've got about 3,500 to 4,000 centre pivots, and they've all been installed in the last 25 years. So there's some very old machines out there that are still working. And there's no requirements for validating these systems either, or testing their uniformity.
Do you know of anywhere where there are enforced requirements around pivot uniformity testing?
In New Zealand, Irrigation New Zealand sets the standards for uniformity, and it's enforced by local councils. So for some councils, they've got pretty strict requirements. If you don't meet uniformity, then it's considered an environmental breach. Particularly Canterbury, they're really trying to avoid nutrient leaching. So they're pretty serious about making sure that all the pivots are working well. But yeah, nothing like that in Tassie. So last year we tested 19 pivots, and of that, 53% were out of calibration by more than a millimetre, and 26% wouldn't pass the minimum standards in New Zealand. So why would you test the system? Well, you can't manage what you don't measure. You can test it to improve your system and improve your crop performance, and also to validate new machines and systems. Some people might withhold a certain amount of the purchase price of their machine until it's been tested. And like we said before, also to comply with environmental regulations. But for our purposes, we were testing to improve crop performance for broccoli. So we did all these tests for Mike Henry from Simplot, and he manages a lot of different broccoli paddocks. And it's a great crop to work with for this because it's very water sensitive, and it's also planted as a transplant. So in their first few weeks, they're really vulnerable to overwatering and underwatering. And also uniformity in irrigation helps in uniformity of development. For broccoli, because it's hand harvested, it's pretty expensive to get out of the ground. So having a uniform harvest is pretty essential. So basically it's just putting catch cans out and waiting for the pivot to go over, and then coming through with the GPS to log the exact location and the exact reading. And we use that information to make maps like this. So this one shows the millimetres of depth applied, and you can see this pivot's pretty variable. There's some areas that are about 4.5 millimetres and some areas that are almost at 10 millimetres.
And what was that? Sorry, that pivot there, what was the applied amount meant to be on that one?
Oh, yeah. This one was meant to be 8 millimetres. So
yeah, right.
Yeah, within that, there's quite a bit of variability. Another way we try and show the information is percentage difference from the applied depth, the set depth. So some bits are more than 40% less, some bits are more than 40% more. So it's just a nice way of showing the extent of the problem that you have. The other things that we're measuring are the average. This is probably the most important one, but does the average amount applied match what's on your box? We're also looking for outliers as well. Where are your problem areas? Where are the simple things that you can fix, like changing a sprinkler or fixing a leak? And we're also looking at uniformity. So there's two measures for uniformity that are commonly used. There's distribution uniformity and the coefficient of uniformity. And I'll go through the definitions of these because I'll be using them a bit later when I explain the results. So they're often abbreviated to DU and CU. And we'll start with DU. It's a score out of 100 and it compares the average application of the driest 25% to the overall application. So basically what that means is if you have a DU of 80, that means that on average, the driest quarter of your paddock is only receiving 80% of the total average. So why would you want to know that? It lets you quantify what your yield lag is. Say I know that for every millimetre I apply, I'm getting 20 kilograms per hectare, and I choose to irrigate 300 mils over the season. That's giving me a yield of about 6 tonnes per hectare. But if I have a DU of 80, that means that 25% of my paddock is only getting 240 millimetres. So that's 4.8 tonnes per hectare. So that's a 1.2 tonne difference. And that allows you to ask yourself, is that difference acceptable? Am I willing to accept that shortfall? Or
I
should
like
I
that as, sorry, Chelsea, I
Right.
like that as well because you're talking about a direct effect that it can have on yield. We know in a lot of our soils here, particularly through the Midlands, that if you fall behind in your irrigation early on in the season, that you can have have issues that occur down the line, such as your soil dries out to a point that it can't hold on to moisture that you later rely on. So things like irrigation efficiency down in the back end of the season, especially when your crop needs water the most, or when your evapotranspiration is the greatest, you can have flow on effects. So yeah, while that yield is a pretty stark figure, yeah, the other impacts that decrease uniformity efficiency towards the end of the season, I reckon would be an issue too.
Yeah, definitely. And that would cause runoff into other areas too. Yeah, you're creating problems you don't really need to have. If it's something you can control like this, it's a good thing to get on top of. The other thing that gives you is your margin for combating the yield lag. So back to that slide before, if that 1.2 tonnes per hectare isn't acceptable, then your solution could be to increase the rest of your watering by 20%, which firstly, is that possible? Is that too expensive to do? And if I do that, will my soil drain properly or will there be waterlogging issues? Which is often the case, is it, Marek? Do you reckon there's many soils in Tasmania that could be overwatered by 20% without having other problems too?
Not with the variability that you'll see across your paddocks. I mean, when you've got a pivot that's working well anyway, you're always usually going to get wet areas, especially if a large rainfall event comes. So exactly what you were talking about just before. Why, when you're dealing with variability in your paddock that you can't control, why have variability in another aspect that you can control? It just it really raises the issue.
Yeah. So back to this, the numbers that we're looking for are 80. That's the minimum DU requirement for New Zealand, and 90 is considered above best practice. So a low DU score, to summarise, means that the driest parts of your paddock are chronically underwatered and there's a yield lag. And it's also difficult to improve that yield lag. You're going to get excessive water costs and waterlogging as well. A high DU score, on the other hand, means that your paddock, it's not that far behind, there's less yield lag, and it gives you the option to safely target it too without causing the waterlogging.
I like the term chronically underwatered, because it's something that you know if you're trying to catch up, you're going to potentially going to impact down. It's not just a missed irrigation that you can catch up with; it's just continual lack of water has that lasting impacting effect. So I like that too, actually.
Exactly. It's a problem you might not realise for years or decades. It's CU is the other measure that we use. CU is coefficient of uniformity, and like DU, it's measured out of 100, but it finds the average deviation from the average. So, for example, a CU of 94 means that the average spot in your paddock will be within 94% of the average. Or to put it a different way, on average, any spot in the paddock will only deviate from the average by 6%. So the higher the score, the better. The numbers are a bit higher for this one. The minimum for New Zealand is 85 and 90 is considered best practice. So a low CU score means that there's just generally poor uniformity. There might be overwatering and underwatering at the same time, or more of one or the other. And a high CU score means that uniformity is good overall. So back to broccoli, I'll go through the results of the tests I did. So we tested 19 systems and the catch can spacing was 3 to 5 metres, and we tested in optimal conditions where wind gusts were below 17 kilometres an hour. So for distribution uniformity, we had 26% below the New Zealand standard, below 80. We had majority of the results between 90 and 80, and we had a few above 90 at that optimal standard. For our coefficient of uniformity, we only had a few below the New Zealand standard. Most were between 85 and 90, and we had 42% above 90 in that best practice area. For the average application depth, we had some really interesting results. So ideally, you want your average application to match the set application depth. You want it to be as close as what you are to typing in the machine. 6 out of 19 machines were within 1 millimetre. The vast majority of them were more than a millimetre out. So that's showing that there were some serious miscalibration issues across the board.
And a majority of them under or over irrigating outside that 1 mil?
Yeah, majority of them were under applying. We only had one machine that was over applying. And that was over applying by about 2 millimetres, and that was because it was an old machine with really worn out regulators. So there was nothing holding that water back. The rest are just moving a bit too fast or the number's not quite right. We had one that was under applying by 50% though, which is crazy.
Right. Yeah. And it just takes me back to some of the stuff we did with James Hills at Elliott, where they got solid sets, and there was just one sprinkler, and just because of a windy season, the spring we had that windy spring, it was the leeway side of it, and it was just it worked out. I think he worked out that it was getting 1 mil less every irrigation out of solid sets. I was putting up more often, but that 1 mil had such a flow-on effect in terms of not just not keeping up with crop demand, but also, like I mentioned earlier, the change in your soil structure because it wasn't being maintained in that optimal condition. So it might seem like a little, but those flow-on effects that can have quite a big difference. So that's pretty interesting there.
Yeah, 100%. Especially on the broccoli, hence why Mike's doing it. We also had 3 out of 19 people who didn't know what their pack size was. They didn't know what their pivot was set to at all. This is kind of common on older machines where they're manually operated, and you might have bought the farm from someone else and they didn't know. There's no booklet inside the machine. But yeah, it's still an issue because if you don't know how much you're putting on, it's very hard to, irrigate effectively. I will say a lot of the people who had their machines sort of miscalibrated, they had an idea of it might be putting a bit less or a bit more. I think people are tuned into it, but unless you know the exact number, it's pretty hard to do anything about it. So the other thing we were looking for were outliers and problem spots. So there were the easy ones that you can see visually. We shall be checking the pressure on our machine, the end pressure and the base pressure. Just simple things, making sure there's nozzles can make a huge difference.
Yeah,
And
and those, and we've seen quite often where the nozzles have been knocked off, or and it's just sprung straight into the ground. And we've seen paddocks, especially in paddocks that have just been worked, where the force of that can actually create a groove, and where water's running off, and it just gets exacerbated as the season goes on. It's a preferential channel that water will flow down and start to create erosion. So yeah, we've seen plenty of those when it comes to sprinklers that have been knocked off and it's just spraying out.
yeah, and it's just wasting water too. Yeah. Um, Also making sure there's no leaks as well. Leaks at the top causing big puddles in your paddock. Um, and you see this a lot. Sprinkler hoses looped over the sides. They've been pushed up there by the wind, or maybe pushed up there by a tree or by cows. But if that sprinkler isn't pointed straight down, it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's putting water out over here rather than down here. So all these plants are suffering as a result.
Do you see a pretty big, variation in uniformity when they're up hanging around there like that?
Yes.
So,
Yeah. So I've tried to pull all of them down for my uniformity test, but I'm not too tall. So sometimes the catch cans were in this sort of area, and I'd expect a catch can here to be, I don't know, 5 millimeters,
yeah.
whereas one over here would be 8. So it does make a difference, and it's worth fixing. Just even having a big metal stick in the back of the ute or in everyone's ute. So whenever anyone sees it, they can fix it. Or if it's a really ongoing problem, maybe consider adding extra weights to your nozzles so that they're weighed down and not flying around in the wind. Also, the wobbler plates as well. This was a big issue I saw. Wobbler plates not wobbling properly. So just clean your sprinklers out and make sure that's not happening. And
And
sometimes
just on that one, sorry, shall I say, and I
mm,
mean, if you got to the point where sprinklers are worn out, is it just a matter of just grabbing another sprinkler off the shelf that you might have and whacking it on, or what's
no,
something?
I'm
Right.
glad you mentioned that, because that's what a lot of people do. And the placement of the sprinkler is very deliberate. So sprinklers at the end of the machine compared to sprinklers at the start of the machine will be putting on completely different amounts of water. You can kind of see it when you're driving past or when you're looking at your own pivot, but a light flow of water near the center and a heavy flow at the end. Um, that's all designed in your little booklet, your spray pack. If you do have one of those booklets, go through and find out which sprinkler number you need to replace and replace it with that. If you don't know, which a lot of the machines out there don't have the booklets in the center, just look at either side. That's probably a good enough match. What's the sprinkler next to it? Get the same as that. And so some of those issues, they're visible on the machine. You might see issues on the paddock too. We see dry spots. You can see dry spots in your planting as well, or wet spots as well. Yeah, so these obviously magnify throughout the season and hurt your plants. So it's important to get on top of.
And that's an interesting one, and whether that's just a sprinklers being turned off or yeah, decreased because of your wheel tires and just not wanting to bog wheel
Oh,
tires.
yeah.
But again, I mean, I look at that and go, yeah, you're solving one problem, but how much of an impact are you having on the growth around that? So yeah, that's an interesting one. I guess to have a chat to your manufacturer as well. What kind of options there are to reduce that bogging of the pivot without having such an impact. Because if you look at that and do the maths on that compared to every tire, you start to lose a bit of, especially at pasture, that pasture growth there. So that's
Yeah, exactly. I think this one's in carrot seed at the moment, which is, worth quite a bit.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so consider putting a sprinkler that has a sort of half radius.
boom backs. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and that can solve your problem and save your crop too. Um, so those are all problems that you can see visually. Gonna go through some problems that might not be so obvious until you test them. So this was a pivot that we tested. This is one of the graphs that one of the maps that shows percentage difference from applied amount. So this one was set to 10 millimeters. Yeah. So when I was walking across this pivot, I walked up and down it and I noted 3 problems. On the 4th span, there was a leak at the pipe, and on the 7th span, there were 2 blocked nozzles. But what about all these other issues we had when we checked with the data? 3rd span and 6th span, we've got very high variability, and on the overhang, there was a lot of under application. These were all issues that we only spotted when we put the catch cans out there and measured the water. So just to push that point even further, here's a photo of a pivot that looks like it's working great. All the sprinklers are working. It's not a video, but all of them are wobbling away, and you wouldn't suspect anything's wrong until you measure it. So this was set to apply 8 millimeters, but that dark blue line there is showing 14 millimeters. And over time, that really adds up and can have big issues on your paddock.
And the other thing I noticed there, Chelsea, is it's really close to those, just correct me if I'm wrong, those dotted lines are the pivot wheels.
Yep, they are. And
So,
you're right,
yeah.
you can sort of see that wheel track already filling up, which could be a problem in the future too.
Yeah.
Here's another one, same story. Pivot's working great. All these sprinklers are working awesome. You can't see anything wrong with it. But when we tested it, we've got over application and under application happening right next to each other. So just issues that you can't see until you measure. So ways to improve it. On the Hub's website, there's some great material created by Pinion. We've got basic centered pivot systems checks, how to check your pressure. And I really like this checklist that they've got up there too. There's also a QR code as well. Yeah. So they've got all the resources here. But I like their checklist as well. Just makes it super simple. Checks to do when it's turned off. Look at the power cables. Ensure, where is it? Check that the sprinkler packages match the nozzle chart. I'd say that's probably the most important one for uniformity. But there's a whole bunch of other things on here that are really helpful for getting your pivots ready before you start irrigating in spring. The other thing I want to say is don't irrigate when it's windy. A lot of you probably already know this, but you still see it happening a lot. When you irrigate, if it's windy, you get evaporative losses and reduced uniformity as well. So that's one of the easiest ways to improve your uniformity without doing anything. Just irrigate when it's still, nice, calm conditions. Awesome. So I've just got some, I thought it might be useful to include some examples of some of the maps I've done. So this one here is an older pivot. This one's from 2002. So you can see it's not super great. The DU is quite low, below that 80 that we expect. And when we investigated further, on this machine, there were 23 sprinklers that were wrong. So this took a bit of time, but carrying the nozzle chart, walking through the paddock and checking the colours on the nozzles. And so I think they went back and they fixed quite a lot of these issues. But yeah, you can also see that there's more application at the end compared to the centre. And we think that's just because the regulators were getting old. It's a very old machine. This one was an interesting one too. You've got this really light section here, which is only putting on about 5 mils compared to 12 mils right next to it. And this one was because of low tyre pressure. So because we had low tyre pressure, half the machine was sort of dragging a bit behind. And that's why you're getting this span sticking in the same spot for a lot longer, or at least in this area. We also had issues on new pivots as well. So this pivot was only a year old, but the DU was only 87 and the CU was 90. So no pivot's perfect, but I do think it is worth checking new pivots, especially in the case of this one. So this was one that we tested for Mike, and DU 86, so above the standard, but still not great. You've got some really dry sections, some sort of wet sections, and so we found out that the pack size was 7.2 on this, and after telling the farmer that, they went back to the pivot manufacturer and they'd ordered a 10 mil pack size. So
it just came with the wrong pack.
Yeah, it just come with the wrong pack entirely. So yeah, that one was a good one to spot early on. But he'd already planted a crop. He'd already irrigated a crop with it. So yeah, it's something that you want to check straight away so you're not messing around. But yeah, I think a lot of people forget to check. Simple thing to check. Yeah, and also, like we said before, a lot of the time the average doesn't match what's on the box. So yeah. I think that's all from me, Marek.
Yeah, no, fantastic, Chad. No, that's really interesting, and just knowing through, you know, with the moisture monitoring that we do in a range of different crops, how just under irrigating a little bit in peak ETOs, you know, in summer, December, January, February, how it can fall behind so quickly. That yeah, there's enough. You're up against enough when it comes, to just the weather and trying to match it and get it right, rather than having to deal with something that's an easy fix. So I will give a plug to Chelsea, who's doing uniformity testing around the place. So if it's something you are interested in, feel free to get in touch, and yes, you can produce. So hopefully not a colourful map like she's been showing today, but a nice uniform one coloured map, just to make sure that give you confidence that you know what you're putting on. So then everything else is hopefully falling into line. So thanks for that, Chelsea. Really appreciate it. That was fantastic.
No worries.
Righto, now we'll jump into our seasonal snapshot. Pretty much I was thinking it's going to be a bit boring because we're in that period of where it's just raining and we're at our full point for most of the state, but it's actually more I looked into it. We're starting to get at that transition where we can start to see things that are happening that might give us clues for what's going on, that how things might track when we go into spring and particularly summer this year. So if we start in the northwest, we've got wool north, so those sandy soils in the circular head region, and we can see we're at full point. So we've sat there for the last month, way above where we were the last couple of seasons. So we're really tracking ahead there. So yeah, really tracking along nicely. If we go a bit, and just a reminder, that's that sand, so it's filling from the bottom up. So it's saturation pretty much. So if we look at Edith Creek, again, we got to full point sooner of the last 4 years. But what we can see here is a lot of, so compared to say last year and especially 3 years ago, we can see here that there wasn't much going on. So that's wet, and that was a wet year. So there wasn't much pasture growth, so wet and cold. But this year, I think May was the hottest on record. June and July have been in our hottest top 10 to 7% of June and July's. So it's been promoting pasture growth. And you can see that here. You can see that, yes, it's been rainy, but we're not at a saturated state. And temperature's been high, so we've had pretty good pasture growths through most of the northwest and northeast. And you can see it slowing down a little bit as we get into August, and that's just a lag phase of the season. So good pasture growth through that area there due to unseasonably warm conditions, and we can see something very similar there. Again, you compare that wet cold winter 3 years ago, we're looking a lot better in terms of pasture production growth, and that slow down. And as we come a bit further down south of Brass, things have tapered right off there. But essentially, we're looking pretty full. So sandy soils are at saturation. I mentioned this last time, that the more structured clays are at full point, and that warm May to July has helped with pasture growth, and we've seen that around. And I'll just put this one out there again, same as last time, pretty strategic about what paddocks you graze. Let's if you've got paddocks that are susceptible to pugging, because they can sit wet, try and keep cattle off if you can, particularly in a year like this where you've got good feed, that you're not having to really try and stretch your paddocks out, because they're impacts that can have long-lasting effects. So we go across to the northeast, and this is one of the best winter refills I've seen in the last 4 years, in this part of the world. And again, good pasture growth as well going through there as well. Come further inland, similar story there. They're a little bit behind the coast, not as much rainfall through that April, May, but it's pretty much sitting, pretty nice compared to the last couple of years. And if we go a bit further east around that Waterhouse, Russia Lagoon area, we can see here that we're looking pretty similar to where we were those 3 years ago in that winter there. So finally we could see that subsoil moisture's been filled up, so that subsoil moisture's full, which is what we want to see, especially on those sandy sites. With that coffee rock, those coffee rock areas. So the summary for the northeast coast: wettest the profile has been for the last 4 seasons, in a lot of those coastal areas, and full profiles reached inland. And similar to what we said last time, 2 or 3 months ahead. So it's settling out well, which is really good. So the Northern Midlands, this is where we start things start to change a little bit. But if we come around the Elizabethtown region, things are looking similar to sassafras, which is not surprising considering it's not far as the crow flies. Meander, sitting wet, but not. It's still in a nice zone for pasture growth. There are some wet spots, so in your black area, your black clay areas, so that the areas on your flats, they're going to be pretty wet. But we haven't had that heaps of follow up. That's really going to really put us in that saturated zone. And as we come down towards the red ferrosols, through Hagley, Selborne, Westbury area, we can start to see we're pretty similar to where we were same time last year. We haven't had too much rain follow up. How it looks this week, we might get some that tops it up, but we're not sitting really wet. I mean, there's always going to be wet areas. They're the spots that kind of do get us off track, especially coming out of spring, going, everything's so wet. Water's got to go somewhere. So it's the low-lying parts of your paddock. That's just what happens every year. And as we come towards Bishopsburn, those areas which can get prone to flooding, that July rain really topped things up, and it's kind of started to slow down there. So this is kind of that wet as we've been in the last 4 years. And as we come the other side of Longford, those rains we had in July, which filled some of those profiles up that flatline during summer. Especially once it's been exhausted, we're starting to see where we're not quite where we were in the last 4 years. So this is where there's a bit of a transition zone in terms of our stored soil moisture, which we'll see as we go a bit further south. So the summary for the Northern Midlands, good follow-up rain, and looking to get again some more this week or next week. And so anything north of Longford, we've got a full profile. And we've had pretty good pasture growth as well, similar to those northeast, northwest parts of the state. This is just a bit of a walk your paddocks and think about your drainage. I mentioned that last time, but again, look where your water's pooling, look where things that are wet that you might be surprised by. So you might have some water movement that you didn't expect. So then, it might help you with the drainage design. So now we're getting to the Southern Midlands. So if we go to Lewisham, we can see here we're pretty much bang on where we were the last 4 years. Now that doesn't mean we're wet. We can see in this conditions here, we can be sandy soils, our windblown sands. We haven't quite reached that that subsoil hasn't been fully filled up. It's that mid zone that's kind of where our water's sitting at the moment. So any full water that falls, where it gets utilised by pasture or bypasses it, but we're not full. I mean, we can see here, this is that full point here that we've reached through September rains, which happened nearly 2 years ago. This is that rainfall that we got through that period there. So we know where our full point is, but we just haven't reached that in winter. in the last, we've visual once in the last 4 years. So knowing where we're sitting there. As we go further down to St. Peter's Pass, again, we're pretty much mid-zone of where we've been that last 4 years. And it's that mid part of the profile that hasn't got moisture in it. So these soils crack and we can see we're filling up deeper. So any subsequent rainfall, we should, start to see, it will give a bit of, it will sit a little bit, will sit, but most of it will bypass and start filling that mid part of the profile. And then we go across a bit east, and it's a similar story really in terms of where we're sitting, same time in the previous years. In this case, again, your soil's falling from the top down. So most of that's fallen, even though we're not at full point like up here, it's going to be available as we come into spring, and hopefully we can get some follow-up rain that fills that subsoil, which will prolong our spring growth. That's going to be really important in that December, that November, December period. Especially if we do have below average rainfall as they are forecasting. So if we then swing across to the Derwent Valley, if we look at around the Bothwell area on those sandier soils, you can see here we're sitting pretty much above where we were the last time a couple of years ago and last year. So hopefully we can look to replicate the spring that we had a couple of years ago. If we look at weather on, we're pretty much sitting where we were. I just want you to take note of that spike there, but we're pretty much tracking as we were. And I've just swung across and put another one in, so looking at Mount Vernon. So we've gone, as these sites go across, we're kind of going a bit further that southeast. But again, we're kind of sitting mid-table through there, so not as dry as we were same time last year. But just interesting to show here what kind of event we need. So we're sitting in that Midlands, in that Southern Midlands, Derwent Valley region. We're sitting very similar where we were the last couple of years, and now we're in August. And looking up to September, what we actually need to get us up to something that brought us into where we were, the summer last year, where it was actually a pretty good in the spring last year, which was actually pretty good for this part of the state. We need a rainfall event like this. So I'm not talking, here we've had a 40 mil rainfall event. The impact isn't as good, isn't as great because it's all dumping on one day. We needed a rainfall event like this where I think it was around about 90 odd mils, 95 mils happened over that week. That's what we need to wet up that profile. And we have not, if we go back to that Mount Vernon one, apart from that rainfall event there, we have not had moisture in the bottom below 60 centimeters. And this is really, and it's important to understand this because this has a flow-on effect in terms of where your roots are in the profile. Your roots need moisture to produce penetration resistance to actually explore that soil. So if we don't have moisture in there, once the plants are actively growing, the chances are we're never going to fill it. And you need to have a period of moisture down there where your roots can actually grow and utilize that. So there's those follow-on effects from dry years, especially where your subsoil moisture has been exhausted and not refilled. That means that you might have moisture down there eventually, but it might not necessarily be utilized. And if you look at this, and I might go back to weather on in terms of where we're sitting, we're looking pretty similar, the last 3 seasons. Now, yes, last year was that rainfall really, and this was a rainfall event that not much of the other part of the state had got. So Bothwell area was sitting quite nice in that regard. For us to get that again, we need that 90 odd mils. Now, if we put that in terms of a decile percentage, a decile 9 September for Bothwell is around that 75 mils. So you're talking about you need a greater than a decile 9 September to replicate that. So that's kind of gives us a bit of indication where we're sitting and what needs to happen for us to replicate what we had there last year. If not, we're kind of sitting more like a 2024, 2023 season. So these are the things that I'm saying. We're starting to see signatures coming along to give us a bit of an indication of what we actually need to get us to where we want to be or where it's going to look. And then we go across towards Ooze, and we can see things are looking a bit better. They've had rainfall events that have come through from the west that haven't quite come across through to Bothwell through July, and we're sitting a bit high, better, more soil moisture again. We've got we've got opportunity here to fill that as well. So hopefully we get some more rainfall events, those westerly systems for those guys through that Hamilton ooze area. So go across to the Coal Valley. We can see that we're similar in terms of where we're getting that similar to that St. Peter's Pass. That's all that part of the world down there doing a workshop in walnuts. So I was actually digging around there. So there's areas that are low-lying that are nice and wet, but your slopes on those clays that crack. We're hoping to hopefully get some rainfall that follows up there. And I've chucked this one in for down at Bruny Island.
I think there's a question mark in
is there?
In the chat, yeah. From
Matt, is there a level of moisture needed at depth for grapevines to explore and develop roots at depth? Perennials are a little bit different. So they will have their roots down there. But yes, in terms of roots that will grow year on year, that moisture, they'll sit there and they'll be fine. But if you're in a cracking clay, that shearing can actually shear those feeder roots, those roots that come off your main nodal roots. So yes, but what we do see is that the plant then just the vine just really focuses on that top 40, 50 centimeters where the moisture is, and we don't really see it utilizing that moisture down deep. So in any perennial crop, seeing that full profile just means that it will draw down I guess linear. If you didn't have irrigation, it draws down in a linear fashion, just drawing from 10, 20, 30, 40. As soon as you've got a buffer down below, it doesn't seem to use that if that buffer does fill through irrigation, it doesn't really seem to use it once the vine started to grow. So having that full profile is really important for anything like a vine, or any cherries or things like that, as long as it's not too wet. Thanks, Jels. So a summary for that Southern Midlands and Drought Valley. So we're pretty much sitting similar to where we were at the same time the last 3 years. At this point, I'm looking at it going, I think we're unlikely to hit winter refill. Like I said, we need a decile 9 September, August and September to kind of get anywhere near winter refill. So it's probably highly unlikely. And these areas, they need a spring rainfall to get a prolonged growth within summer. The problem is that yes, we've got some moisture in the ground, but that's only going to take us so far. So that we're really hoping to get some August, September rains, because if yes, we're going to have pasture growth in the spring, but it's going to happen quicker if we're not wet, because there's no waterlogging there, and the soil moisture is just going to be exhausted sooner, pretty much. So if we go across to the east coast and the Fingal Valley, around that Swansea area, we can see we're sitting probably near the lowest where we've been in the last four years. We've just had very little follow-up rain from winter. Some other areas are looking a bit better, a bit further south. So around that, Kelvedon and down through those regions, we're looking a bit better, but looking fairly low because we haven't had much winter rainfall through there. As we come across to the Fingal Valley, we're kind of sitting mid-table in terms of where our moisture's at, and it hasn't really shifted again. Haven't had too much follow-up rain, so I'll look at that and go, are we, that subsoil moisture again? That's so important for our plants to be able to make sure that we're getting roots into that to utilise that profile. If it's not there once pasture really start, especially once they go into that reproductive phase, it's not really going to be accessible, even if we do get follow-up rainfall. So timing there is important, but we haven't really hit a full period, for the last 3 years. And then we go across further to the Midlands, and it tells a similar story on killing moons on that river sand, and on our typical clay soils, our duplex soils, we're seeing something fairly similar. So the summary for the East Coast and the Fingal Valley, pretty similar to where we were the last time 2 years, in the last 2 years. So have a use that as a bit of a guide as to what as to what we're looking to expect. Unlikely to hit winter refill, very similar, and stored moisture very dependent on your soil, so where it's sitting. So again, sands versus clay. So if we go up to the islands, Flinders Islands looking pretty good. Oh, sorry, skip past, looking pretty good. We're up with sitting where we were about 3 years ago, where it was a pretty good season in there. So profiles are pretty much full. On your heavier soils, which the Injera is, and on your lighter soils, it's looking pretty good. And pasture growth has reflected that as well, especially with that warmer winter that we've had. And then on King Island, we can see here Egg Lagoon, which is on your semi-coastal country, pretty much similar where we were similar time last year, but we've had that extra period. So you can see 2 years ago, last year, and this year, we can see that we've hit that winter point sooner, which is what we want to see, because that means that any rainfall that we're getting is hopefully filling up dams. So filling up water storages, that's what we're getting out of that. If we go on Bargara alone, again, it's find that similar signature in terms of where we're sitting year on year. So yeah, again, it's looking a lot better there, and it's wet there at the moment, which is good. So summary for King and Flinders. Flinders tracked very similar to the last 2 seasons. Last month I said the bottom of the profile is charging. It has now recharging, and the water's there. And with King Island, will we go through a period of saturation? And I think the answer is yes, we have. So we're in that spot now. Again, more rain is welcome to fill up those storages too. So I just want to go to the BOM long term, just to look over that as give us a bit of a guide and see how things are looking. So for the rest of August, we can see here through the Midlands there, that white there pretty much means there's a 50% median chance for exceeding median rainfall. That doesn't mean it's going to be, they're predicting average rainfall. That means anything could happen. There's a wide variability of what could happen. We could have hardly any rain, or we could be quite above that median average. Now, we can see the East Coast is they're predicting that dry. So that's for August. So August, anything could really happen. That's including next week's rainfall. But if we then go into September, we can start to see that the prediction for rainfall is starting to exceed median rainfall, starting to drop a fair bit, and especially in that East Coast, which is those El Niños that we talk about. They're probably one of the parts that do get affected a bit more. So that's for September. But then we go to October, December, and the outlook there is for that pretty much a lot of the state to be covered there. So when I was talking about that using your deciles in terms of what kind of rainfall do we need to get us to this point, that might be a point where you pull the lever on a decision such as stocking and selling or whatever it is. This is, so if you look here, there's the prediction of being that 50% within that first 1 and 2 decile range, and then that another 20% in that 3rd and 4th. So being in those, anything above a decile 5 looks fairly low outcome. Not saying that it will happen, but just saying this is if you look at this is kind of where you go. The term things could get tricky. Well, make sure you have a plan in place. The one thing that does look pretty certain for a lot of it is our temperature. So looking at across the board there in terms of our max temperature now, that is important in terms of plant water use. So if temperatures are going to be higher, it's going to be plant water use, especially coming out of spring, is going to be greater. So ETO is going to be greater. So then that grading that we see as we're coming out of spring and that water use is going to be steeper. So we want to make sure that that's where our spring can creep up on us and fizzle out pretty quick because of our high temperatures. Just want to pull some farming forecaster graphs here just to kind of show where we're sitting in terms of those. So we can see here you needed the creek, those lines, those 3 lines here. So what prediction, pasture growth in a decile 9, 5 and 1 rainfall, they're pretty close together. And they start to spread out here. And this is mainly because we have moisture. We have moisture in the profile. So we know that September, October is going to be pretty good. And this is where uncertainty kind of comes into it. But, the season's looking pretty typical in terms of where we're going to sit in terms, if we have a decile 9 year, we're sitting within that 50 to 90 decile of years. And as we go down through to Clawne, which is around that Westbury region, we can start to see here again we're close together and they start to spread out as we get to areas which generally have a lower annual rainfall. So yeah, it's spreading out where we're sitting. If we go to the east coast, we can see that they diverge a lot sooner, and that's because we just don't have that moisture in the profile. So understanding that moisture is really important. If we go to Apsley Park, which is just east of Bothwell, you can see again, yep, we have some sorts of moisture, but that divergence happens very quickly. And if we're looking at being in that decile 1 to 2 year, where we're going to sit in a year which is probably going to be in that decile 1 to 2 years. So that's something to potentially look to plan for if we do get those rainfall events. But our rainfall, if we do get greater than that, rainfall does come, we can look fairly good. It won't be doom and gloom like an El Nino might suggest. And then on the islands, so Pagara, so King Island and Flinders, things are looking pretty good. If the rainfall sits within that decile 1 year, we're still looking at above that. We're not sitting below that red shaded area on both the islands, so it's set it up pretty well. So just touched on these, but next month our guest speaker will be Phil Graham, who's the farming forecaster guru. He's the guy that develops all the farm models that drive these. So he's going to give us a bit of a rundown, a bit more of an in-depth view of what we're looking at when we're looking at a farming forecaster site, but also he'll give us a bit of a seasonal outlook based on what they're showing here. But I'll just show this in terms of how we use this in terms of understanding what our subsoil moisture means to us, our soil moisture means. So our key takeaways for this seasonal update is understand what a dry summer means for you and your production systems. So for cropping guys who have water surety, it's a great thing because you've got control over irrigation. But for dryland grazing, understand what it means. So spring looks pretty good. I think we can say that spring is going to be a good spring for anything around that Longford, north of that Longford region. So it's going to be a good spring, but understand what summer means, because if that rainfall doesn't come, that's where that summer is going to tighten up. And utilize all your resources for planning and decision making. So have a plan. Talk to your agro, talk to your professionals, paid professionals. Look, what we've spoken about today, have a look at that, pull up farming forecast and say, well, if this is the thing, if this happens, what should we do, or what decisions should we be making if that happens? You don't necessarily have to make them, but know that there's levers that you can pull. So in terms of where moisture is, northwest, northeast, and Midlands, profiles are full. Things are looking good. That sets us up nicely for spring. We haven't been in the period of saturation, mainly because of that pasture growth, warmer than usual conditions. Anything south of that Longford region, we're looking unlikely to hit winter refuel. So we should have a spring, but how long that spring lasts for, or how productive it is, really does depend on some follow-up rain from August and September. Because if we're looking to have a dry average, spring will start quick and potentially go quick. So we want to see a bit more rainfall coming in the next couple of months. And that's the one I usually finish on. These are all this information has come from our weather station network and farming forecast site. So if that's something you want to subscribe to have it on your fingertips, along with other information that we have on those sites, scan the QR code. I hope that's not too blurry. Otherwise, get in touch. And if irrigation uniformity testing is something that you might be interested in, get in touch, and Chelsea can walk you through the process through that, and come out and test your gear. So thank you very much, Chelsea, for jumping on again, and thanks for everyone. See you next month. Cheers.
No worries.